Here with my co-host Karen Lee.
Hi, everybody.
And I'm also here with David Andrews. He's a senior scientist, and he's one of the researchers on the EWG bug repellent study, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. And David, that was quite some study, 21 pages of a lot of information. So I'm going to hand the floor to you, and I'm going to put you up there to talk about what are some of the discoveries that you found. And I know a lot of them were shocking to you as well.
Sure, and thank you very much for having us on today. It's a pleasure to be here and explain in a little more detail what we did when we put together this report on bug repellents, and just allow a little back and forth feedback in terms of questions with people who may have questions or concerns about the results we got to. And so one of the things we did in this report, obviously with all of our work on cosmetics in the Skin Deep database, as well as our work in the consumer product space, we've gotten a lot of questions about, what are the options available to consumers in terms of bug repellents? What are you going to use? And a lot of this can be different scenarios. I'm going to the beach and there's this type of bugs, or I'm going to be hiking through tick country. What do I do? And so we approach this from that perspective, from the perspective of the consumer, trying to find the best available options, especially if you have kids or you're concerned about the toxicity of ingredients. And so what we did is we reviewed government recommendations, peer-reviewed literature, testing results, submissions to EPA, and registration information that companies provide when they come out with a new repellent and when they have to provide safety information to EPA. So we really tried to do the most exhaustive review we could, and we focused primarily on the toxicity and the health concerns about the ingredients in bug repellents, as well as the efficacy, with the acknowledgement that some of the bites and the outcomes of bites from ticks and mosquitoes can be life-changing in many ways, and they're quite serious. So we did find that quite important, and oftentimes, having an effective repellent is important if you want to be able to enjoy the time outside, and we know there's a lot of interest in making sure that families and really anyone spends time outside and enjoys the outdoors. And so some of the findings we got to were, really as a first line of defense, you can look to non-repellent options, covering up with long sleeves, long pants. There's been a number of articles on how fans used outdoors can be quite effective at repelling mosquitoes. So simple steps like that can go a long ways into even avoiding the use of repellents. We also recommend that people are familiar with both the bugs in either where they live or where they're going on vacation, so that you know what you're up against in terms of either mosquitoes, mosquito-borne diseases, or Lyme disease, particularly if you're on the East Coast between Virginia and Maine. And so after that first step, we have, as shown on our screen here, really the simple recommendations, and that is the short protection time products and the long protection time. And one of the important things with insect repellents and bug repellents is that the concentration of the product does not determine the efficacy as a general rule. And so the lower concentration products just work for a shorter period of time. So there's the 5 to 10% products typically work for, and that's 5 to 10% of the active ingredient. It will be labeled on the front of the bottle. And those products typically work for 2 to 3 hours. And the longer and the higher concentration products, 20%, will be when you need much longer duration protection, like you're going for an all-day hike, or you're going to be outside for an extended period of time. And so, and this is primarily referring to the 4 ingredients that we ended up finding as very reasonable choices, especially when mosquito and tick-borne diseases are present. And those 4 ingredients are picaridin, DEET, PMD, or otherwise sold as oil of lemon eucalyptus, and IR 3535. And as our tip sheet highlights, our tip sheet kind of split that out into what you'll find available on the shelves. We highlight which ones are available in the short protection time, so that's if you're going to be out for a shorter period of time, and the long protection time products. And often we recommend defaulting to the shorter protection time. So, and if you end up needing more protection in a few hours, or the bugs are really bad, you can reapply the product. And so some of the surprising results, especially in this community, obviously would be that we had DEET as a reasonable choice for consumers. And part of this is due to its history of use in terms of being extremely effective against a broad range of both mosquitoes as well as other biting insects, and effective in terms of use as a tick repellent. And coupled with overall relatively low health concerns. There have been some reports in terms of concern that there are neurological effects, and the evidence is extremely limited, and we didn't think that outweighed the potential benefits of extremely effective protection from mosquitoes and ticks, as well as the other biting insects. And it's not that we're saying, go out and buy just DEET and buy it in high concentrations. Definitely that is not the message. We actually just had a recent blog on EnviroBlog, one of the blogs on our website last week, about how you really want to avoid 100% DEET. That really has no place on the shelves, and we don't think that's something that anyone should be using. Really, the efficacy and the benefits, as well as the concerns, stop at well, I'd say 30% is the concentration you want to max out with in terms of DEET. Higher concentration products do raise some concerns for us, and they don't really seem to provide any benefit. The lower concentration, we do note that in terms of kids, we'd recommend really limiting the use on children, and really for kids under 12, I believe that we recommend staying under 10% DEET. So it's definitely qualified, and it's not, just go buy higher concentration DEET and use it willy-nilly. But in certain circumstances, we recognize that that is an available option. It's probably the most widely available repellent, and is extremely effective, and we see it as a reasonable option in some circumstances. That being said,
so
one of the important things here, and pardon me for interrupting. One of the important things is that there are a number of viable options for consumers that are not DEET. Some of these other repellents that I recommend, they seem to be extremely effective. Most of them have only been on the market for a few years. I definitely don't remember any of them when I was growing up. The picaridin and the IR 3535 have been used in Europe for over 20 years now, and they seem to be extremely effective, and the health concerns are really quite low with those products.
Karen, you had a question. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, most parents are concerned with their kids, I think, more than themselves, because we're adults, and we tend to be, I think, less careful when it comes to bugs than the children. So, but you're saying that any products that have DEET concentration of 10% or less is acceptable for kids. Is that correct, David?
That is,
and it's safe for kids.
We did find it as a reasonably safe option for children. We wouldn't recommend using it every day for months on end, but intermittent use over vacation or occasionally, it didn't raise red flags for us, and it actually did make our recommendation list. I do have three children under the age of 5. So it's definitely something I approached from a personal perspective also. It's definitely something I was very much more concerned about with when I started doing the study than when I completed it. And in some ways, it's a little bit of a relief that there are those options available. We highlight that there are a few options available. I don't know necessarily be my first choice. We didn't really try to break it down to that point, but we do see it as a reasonable option.
So if you're sending your kid to a camp, you know, it's a nature camp, they're outdoors every single day, swimming, hiking, and, you know, I know I sent my kids to those camps every summer. So they have to apply something every single day. So do you think that they should apply one with DEET one day and then maybe switch to a different brand that does not have DEET the next day and kind of alternate back and forth? Because what do you do when the kid is out in the, you know, out in the woods every single day? You're saying that don't apply it every day, but they're in, you know, situations like that. What would you do with your kids?
That's definitely an interesting question. It's something I've thought about too. You know, is it better to use, you know, alternate between them or not? Potentially. I think with any of these products, it's important to, before we get to applying them every day, it's important to, you know, test on a small patch of your skin just to see if there's any reaction. And that's definitely the case also with the botanical products, which have a higher concentration of active ingredients. You know, for sending away my kid to camp, and I should recommend on our website, on our report online, we do try to break out the different scenarios that people may encounter. I believe we have 22 different scenarios where we try to nuance the recommendations in terms of, you know, what we recommend for different situations. You know, that's you know, and I believe for sending your kid away to camp, I believe we have the lower concentration repellents, the picaridin, the DEET, and the PMD as options for sending your kid away to camp. You know, maybe that next step would be alternating, you know, 1 week of one week another. The concern really came up, and why that's in the report is, you know, some concerns that had come up by, I believe, National Park Service workers in the Everglades who had been using 100% DEET for months, and that seemed to raise some concerns, and so that's where that information in terms of the why we highlight not using higher concentration DEET repeatedly. You know, using the 7-10% product over even the course of, you know, long camp sessions, I don't think would raise concerns.
You know, you also talked a little bit about the botanicals, and you know, that was so shocking to me about the report, is what you found with the botanicals, because a lot of people in the green world will reach for the ones that have, you know, rosemary or peppermint oil or things like that. And tell us a little bit about what you found about those particular products.
Sure, and I'll start off by saying in our scenarios, we break out situations where we do think they can be options for consumers. We do highlight primarily the EPA or these 4 ingredients. They're EPA registered bug repellents, where they've had to prove efficacy as well as submit health and safety information. And so with the botanical products, a lot of the testing that's available, and it's definitely much more limited, both in terms of efficacy, shows that, you know, these products will last from anywhere from a number of minutes to hour and a half, depending on where you are, and depending upon what bugs there are out there. And so in general, they're much less effective from the information we've seen, and they have a higher concentration of a lot of the active ingredients in those products have a high concentration of known allergens. And so we have raised concern about allergens in previous reports in terms of cleaners as well as in terms of cosmetic ingredients. Most of these ingredients in the botanical repellents would have to be labeled as containing known allergens if they're sold in Europe. Obviously here we don't have stringent labeling requirements in that respect, but that's definitely something that consumers should be aware of, that you should really just make sure you test it on a small patch of your skin before applying it widely, just due to some of the concerns about allergic reactions that you could have. And we do recognize that in situations maybe where some of these vector-borne diseases aren't a big concern and you're going to be outside for a shorter period of time, they could be a viable option.
Yeah, because I know that you had mentioned that sometimes their exposure, I mean not exposure, you had to put them on like every 1 to 2 hours. That was one thing that I noticed in the report.
Yeah, it's quite possible that you need very frequent application, especially if there's aggressive mosquito species outside, or it may even be more frequent than that. I mean, some of those can be relatively ineffective, depending on where you are. And I think in many ways there's probably much more variation between different places in the country and different mosquitoes. One interesting thing is there's such a huge number of mosquito species, and yet most of these products are only tested against 1 or 2 certain types that are easy to grow in captivity. And I can't remember the number offhand. I believe we mentioned it in the report, but there's hundreds of different types of species, even within the United States.
And one of the, we talked before, you know, we got on this video, we talked about there's that new, is it tiger mosquito that's actually out during the day? Because a lot of people think that mosquitoes come out at like 3 o'clock, because that's what they typically do in New Jersey. But there's one that's now out during the day.
Right. Yes, the tiger mosquito. It's an extremely aggressive mosquito species, and it is very active during the daylight hours. So it really can be quite a nuisance. I remember even 5 or 6 years ago in the DC area, there weren't any for the most part, and now in many places it can be horrible to go outside even in the middle of the day, which is in some ways quite disappointing.
Karen has a question. Karen, go ahead.
For those people who are making their own bug repellents at home, what is your advice?
You know, so making your bug repellents at home in many ways is similar to using some of the botanical ingredients. And there I'd just be cautious about, you know, allergic. I think the biggest concern would be allergic skin reactions. And so making sure to obviously test a small bit on your skin before applying widely. And in terms of efficacy, I think that's the more, you know, the more difficult part, just because most of those ingredients, and from all the information I reviewed, is they're generally less effective. But you know, in certain circumstances where you may not have a large number of aggressive mosquitoes, they may work quite well for you. But you know, in terms of the effective protection, especially if you're concerned about West Nile and Lyme disease, our recommendations tended towards these 4 approved ingredients that I mentioned earlier: the Picardin, the IR3535, oil of lemon, eucalyptus, and DEET.
Yeah, but these are not type of ingredients that you can easily go to go get from Whole Foods or online, though, right? Maybe the lemon eucalyptus oil, but the other 3, it's not like you can go walk into a store and say, you know.
That's correct, that's correct. And so the recommendations for the homemade ingredients would tend to be more aligned with the botanical repellent ingredients. And I think an important point to make here is that the oil of lemon eucalyptus is different than lemon eucalyptus oil you get in the store. So what they've done is they've taken the lemon eucalyptus oil that's extracted from the plant, and they've actually heated it and converted some of the molecules in there into the active ingredient that's labeled on the front of the bottle. It'll say PMD, usually between 10 and 20%. And so I think it's important to point that out, that even if you're using the lemon eucalyptus oil, you may not be getting the strong botanical or the strong protection against insects and bugs that you'd get in some of the commercial products. And I think it's just worth being aware of that those are actually different ingredients.
One of the things one of the things I wanted to point out, because you know when people think of Lyme disease, they think of that they're having to walk through tall grass, and that's not the case. So if you could speak a little bit about Lyme disease, I know you're not an expert on it, but why everybody should be worried about it on the East Coast or whatever region that you said, that you can pick it up by brushing up against a plant.
Sure, that's definitely the case, and I have difficulty recalling the exact number offhand, but I believe it's about 85, or at least it's suspected that 85% of cases occur within 100 feet of your house or within a domestic setting, which makes it you know, it doesn't necessarily mean you want to be applying repellent every time you're within 100 feet of your house, but I think there's steps you can take around your home to avoid having ticks near your house. And we recommend, I believe it's the state of Connecticut has published a brochure that we link to in our site, and the CDC. We link to the CDC site and the state of Connecticut in terms of, you know, if you have trees close to your house, you want to make sure you create a wood chip barrier around your house. And there's steps you can do to make it much less likely to have the ticks around your house, because it's definitely the case it doesn't take necessarily walking through like a long hike through the woods to get bitten by these ticks. And I mean the thing with Lyme disease is it's the nymph stage of the black-legged ticks, and they're extremely small, extremely difficult to see, and you're most likely to get it in the spring months, spring through early summer is definitely the time to be most aware of that.
Because just recently I got another tick on me, just cleaning out my beds, and that was like 5 feet from my house, and I actually had Lyme disease, so I'm very cautious about it. And it's really easy to get, and it's not something that you should just say, oh, I'm not walking through big grass. It's not a fun disease. So I was really appreciative that you all talked about that on the report, because it is a dangerous disease. So.
It's definitely a dangerous disease, and it's becoming extremely prevalent, it seems like. I mean, all the rates we've seen for the East Coast is that the number of cases year to year just keeps increasing, for whatever reasons that is. And I don't believe you necessarily always have to have a huge deer population around your house. I believe it can be transmitted by other rodents and mice and things like that. So it's possible that these ticks are in a number of areas where you may not necessarily expect them.
You want to hear a scary story? I know somebody who works in a fruit and vegetable store, and she got the tick from handling the veggies in her store.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So she didn't even go out in her backyard. She didn't go in the grass. She didn't go anywhere. All she does is she's a cashier handling veggies and produce. And she got bitten. She got the bullseye rash, the whole 9 yards. It was really weird.
Yep, it's really so prevalent. It's like crazy.
Yep.
You also talked about clothing that gets sprayed with, I know I'm going to say this wrong, picarditin? Am I saying that right? Picarditin? I can't ever say it.
So that's interesting. We didn't go into too much detail. There's treated clothing out there. That's available, especially if you're spending a lot of time in tick country. It's permethrin. You can also buy it in the store as something you can spray on clothing. I know it's available in outdoor stores. In general, we recommend against that, or use extreme caution. That's definitely much higher on the concern list in terms of toxicity. And I can't say that we did an in-depth review of the toxicity of the permethrin here. We made note of its existence and the fact that in one study it was shown to be, it was actually North Carolina state water employees that spend a lot of time walking outside, and there's a drastic reduction in the number of tick bites the employees had who actually wore treated pants. But it does raise some concerns. Like I said, I definitely recommend not self-applying this. This is an actual pesticide where it kills on contact with the ticks. And I guess that's something that's a little different in terms of the repellents. The skin-applied repellents are not, they don't actually kill the insects, that they really just act as a repellent based on the smell, or the smell, or how the insects perceive the smell of those compounds. Whereas, you know, the active pesticides that you'll find in other products are very different, where they are intended to kill or injure the bugs or pests.
You know, I just want to play devil's advocate with you for a second. You know, I could be a botanical bug repellent company who's listening to this and saying, what? You know, you can't just, you know, dismiss us. Maybe we're not allergic with certain chemicals. So what would they do to prove their efficacy so that they would make your list or future lists? What would they have to do?
Right, and you know, one of the things that we saw, that we could find little information on is the broad scale efficacy against different types of mosquitoes for a few hours, and I think, you know, we looked at both the efficacy testing available in the peer-reviewed literature. We also looked at everything from Consumer Reports, Backpacker Magazine. They tested a number of those botanical blends. Oftentimes, most of those products lasted for less than 30 minutes for them. And then we also looked at government recommendations. But for us, we were really, you know, trying to be sure that, you know, if you are, and we highlight this specifically if you're concerned about West Nile or one of these transmitted diseases, or if you have bad reactions to mosquito bites, you really want to lean towards these registered products. So more, I think more information in terms of the efficacy would go a long ways, and in some way to clarify that the allergen concerns are low, or how low they are. Obviously, you know, that is one thing that raised the flag for us, was the fact that almost every ingredient in most of these, or at least most of the active ingredients in these products, contain a significant portion of known allergen.
So is it just the allergens that you're concerned with, or is there a long-term toxicity? You know, whether it's cancer, you know, carcinogenic, or whether it's some sort of a, you know, neurotoxin or endocrine disruptors. Any of the other really, you know, significant effects? I know you keep mentioning the word allergen, but I'm thinking, you know, other horrible toxicity.
Right, and you know, for this is almost universal, not just for the botanicals, but for almost all these ingredients.
Right.
Almost all the reactions are, you know, allergic skin reaction or some skin irritation, and that's pretty consistent across the board. You know, very little, you know, could find very little information to indicate any of these would provide long-term detrimental health effects. And so in many ways that should be encouraging, because to us it seemed like there are numerous available options to consumers, and we really tried to break that down, obviously in our website, with the different scenarios and different situations you can be in, and nuance our recommendations in that way.
Now, you also broke down 3 and under, which I thought was extremely interesting, and also 6 months and under. And I think that's something that I wanted for you to repeat on camera, because I think that's really important for parents to hear.
Right. Obviously, on young infants, you don't want to be applying repellents, and you want to make sure that, you know, that you can cover them up as much as possible, just because, you know, we know infant skin is much more permeable. Most of these repellents apply right through, and I believe that's a consistent recommendation from us, as well as the federal agencies, being the Environmental Protection Agency and the Center for Disease Control. That
was 6 months and under, right?
That's correct.
But didn't you also have recommendations of certain ones of your ingredients that were not okay for children under the age of 3?
We also highlighted that the oil of lemon eucalyptus as not being recommended for children under the age of 3. And it's not actually due to studies showing that it causes harm, but it's really the lack of studies showing that it doesn't cause harm. And so that should be labeled on all the bottles also. And so that's a part of this too, is, you know, it's important to follow the recommendations on the packaging, and I think that's definitely true with these bug repellents, where they are active ingredients. You know, there are some more concerns about it, and in that case, we recommend not letting your children necessarily, or at least your young children, apply them directly to themselves, and helping out and making sure that it's not sprayed in your face. I will point out that the DEET and the IR3535 are known eye irritants, and so you definitely want to avoid getting them in your eyes. And so I think some of these simple steps that are on the bottle are quite important.
I like the FYIs that you had on there, how certain bug repellents and plastics don't get along, like cameras and watches and things like that. That was very interesting.
Right, and that's definitely true of the higher concentration products. As you go to slightly lower concentrations, I think it's less of a concern, but in some ways it is important to know. I know DEET is definitely it's called the plasticizer, where it has that tendency there, especially the high concentrations, where it can really react with the plastic materials and essentially just sort of dissolve them.
Karen, any further questions?
I mean, I guess my broad question would be, and I know this is what a lot of green bloggers or green moms are asking, is that at one point DEET was deemed as evil, and now you're saying, okay, in low concentration it is okay. So then, do we approach a lot of these chemicals, not just DEET, but a lot of the chemicals that EWG tests with sort of caution, thinking maybe you're saying it's bad, but like down the road it's good? You know what I mean? There's that, like at what point do we really go by your recommendation as being, the Bible, the word that, okay, this is safe now, but then maybe later on you're going to say it's not safe, or you're saying it's not safe now, but then maybe later on you're going to say, okay, in low concentration it's good. You know what I'm trying to get at?
Well, yeah, I understand, and it's obviously a complicated question in some ways, but we try to do the best we can at evaluating all the available information and really looking at the weight of evidence against some of these ingredients, all the studies, and really digging down to see what's out there and how much of a concern it really raises for us. If suddenly some new information comes out, I think it's really on us to make sure that we include that information, especially if it would change our recommendation. In this case, for the most part, it seems relatively unlikely, but I can't speak necessarily completely to what the future will bring. But in this case, these ingredients have been widely used for a long period of time, and they're relatively well studied. So
I will tell you, personally, if it was a choice between me getting Lyme disease and bitten by a mosquito and getting West Nile virus, I can deal with 10% DEET. So I'm personally glad that you are saying that, given the choices, what do you want, And if it's just a skin irritation, if at that, because some people might not even react to any of these products. So do you want to get Lyme? Do you want to get West Nile virus? Or do you want to, be safer by using 10% DEET? I would go for that, personally. But I'm just throwing that question out there just because, that's what this webinar is about. So thank you for your response on that.
Sure, and you don't even necessarily have to go straight with DEET. Obviously, we highlighted on picaridin and IR3535. Definitely see and even PMD, depending on the protection time that you're looking for, really seem to be viable options that should provide similar efficacy. And I will highlight that in terms of Lyme disease, it's generally the longer protection time products that you want to tend towards, so slightly higher concentration. And it's interesting with Lyme disease, most of these ingredients, these repellents, are not 100% effective, which is different. In testing with mosquitoes, the protection time is usually the time till the first time it landed on someone's arm or it tried to bite someone. And so they actually test it by applying it to someone's arm, and they stick their arm into a cage of mosquitoes for 5 minutes, and then do it again the next hour, then do it again an hour later until you get a bite.
I'm glad you didn't call me to be a subject.
Yeah, right. I did not volunteer for any of those studies. But for the ticks, it's different, and they're usually looking at, it provides 98% protection or something like that. So I would definitely not rely on any of them for 100% protection, and be sure to do a tick check every day. And I think that's the important part there.
That's the key, right?
Yep, I do a tick check every single day. I just, like I said, I had a deer tick. No, it was a dog tick on me like 2 months ago. So it's, you really got to be safe. I mean, these things will help, like you said, but you got to also take a little precaution as well. It was fascinating, David. I am so glad that you came on Green Sisterhood's webinar because, like I said, your bug repellent study really took me for a loop there. I was like, whoa, deep? Karen felt the same way too. So I really was glad that you came on and explained it, and even if it meant changing the rules, at least it's telling people what's going to work and what's not, because Lyme and not West Nile, those aren't great, those aren't fun. So I really appreciate you coming on, and you're always welcome on Green Sisterhood's webinar. We hope to see you many, many times with EWG. We love EWG. And everybody next Tuesday, Karen, do you remember who's up next Tuesday? I'm like drawing a blank.
Oh, now you put me on the spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it our
It's Eric.
It's Eric? Yes.
Yep.
We're gonna be talking about cars. We're driving the bus.
And I'm gonna talk a lot about electric vehicle, as you know.
Yes.
Because I competed in a plug-in for charity challenge with the Prius, so I have a lot to say about that.
Yes,
but I just want to say thank you to David again. I know you're very busy, and we had some glitches earlier, but I really appreciate it because living in the Northeast, in New York area, it was a huge concern of mine, and it's not over yet. The deer season is still here, and deer season, Lyme season is still here, and the mosquitoes are still buzzing around me. So it was really important, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So
my pleasure.
Everybody, like and share this video. This is great information to get out to all your friends and family.
And we're going to have the guide link, right, so that people can download. Yep.
Yes. We'll have it on the YouTube video as well as on our site. It'll go up on our site in a couple days, the video to watch for a replay if you didn't get to see it. And always, like I said, share it with everybody. And we will see you next Tuesday, 2 o'clock East Coast time, for our next interview about electric cars and efficient cars. And Karen's going to share us her actual
experience.
That's
right. Right. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Bye.
My pleasure.